When I listen to this music, there's something about it that sounds distinctly French. It's the calmness, the way it blurs together harmonies, the masterful blending of sound colours, something which I couldn't quite put my finger on, something luscious, beautiful, seamless, and somehow French. I wanted to figure out what makes Debussy sound French. What was it that Debussy and his contemporaries did that changed music history and created this exquisitely beautiful style of music? Well, to understand how this music works and how it changed the game in music history, we first have to understand the way things were. For about 2 centuries, the course of music history was spearheaded by Germanic composers. In the 1700s, Johann Sebastian Bach had defined the system of Western classical tonality, a system which even today remains the foundation of Western music theory. Later, Beethoven showed us how we could modulate or change key effortlessly between any of these tonal regions. He showed us an expanded palette of harmonic functions, that every chord could have multiple functions and could go in multiple directions. And later still, Richard Wagner pushed these tensions of classical tonality to their limits without actually breaking the system. Everything was pushed to its expressive max, and yet the rules weren't quite broken, only stretched to their absolute limits. Consistently throughout music history, Germanic composers were the rule makers. They set the standards of how classical music was to be written. This isn't to say that there weren't other national styles. Italy had its rich opera tradition, and France certainly had national composers to be proud of. There was Bizet, Saint-Saëns, Delibes, Franck, and many others, and you could certainly describe these composers as having a particular national flavour. Their music has a sense of delicacy, opulence. You could argue that there's more focus on charm and beauty in this French music rather than on exploring the innermost torments of the soul. But musically speaking, all these composers still play by the German rulebook. The Germanic composers set the rules, and then everyone else would play by them, including these French composers. Sure, French music had a style, but it didn't have its own voice. If France was to define itself musically and stop working in the shadow of these Germanic giants, composers would have to stop playing by the rules. But what are these rules that the French will have to destroy? In order to break the rules, you need to know them first. I can't lay everything out here, but the simplest way to explain it is with the perfect cadence. Since the time of J.S. Bach, musical grammar became governed by the perfect cadence. This is how you define what key you're in. This is how you set up a new key. This is how you'd probably end a piece of music. The perfect cadence was the central pillar in musical grammar. A key element of the perfect cadence is this semitone. This is called the leading tone. We feel that it is leading onto the home note. There's this tension. It wants to go home. We just want it to resolve, and it does, onto the home note. So within the perfect cadence, there's a sense of tension and resolution. That's how music has always worked, that we'd build tension through dissonance, through moving away from the home. This was considered a dissonant chord, and then that tension would be resolved. Tension and resolution. And finally, the other important element of the perfect cadence is good voice leading. Every single voice in this chord moves in a sensible way, just by whole steps or half steps, to resolve itself. There are no strange leaps or strange movements. Each voice resolves itself logically. So, perfect cadences, tension and resolution, the idea of the leading tone or semitone for tension, and good voice leading. These were all crucial elements of music, and even something as far out as Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, which pushes these rules to the extreme. Even then, Wagner is still playing within these rules. He still follows these principles of tension and resolution, constantly using leading tones, perfect voice leading, and while Wagner does avoid clear cadences, it's this constant suggestion that a cadence is coming, which makes the piece so powerful. Cadences were a necessity, a part of the flow of tension and climax in music. They were a part of musical grammar, and they are arguably what makes us feel tension and resolution in Germanic music. We might even call this functional music. All the harmony serves a function. It's designed to take us smoothly from one place to the next, all while either creating tension or resolving tension. So, we set up the rules. Now it's time to knock them down. If France wants to stand out from the crowd, it has to change the rules of the game. But how will this happen? Well, it started not with a piece of music, but with an art movement. This painting is known as Impression, Sunrise, by Claude Monet. Instead of following the traditional standards of art set by the French Academy of Fine Arts, Monet and a group of other painters like him decided to go their own way. Rather than following the old theories of art, they decided that light and the awareness of light is the most important principle. Monet's paintings are obsessed with the subtle changing effects of light. Instead of clearly defined forms, the colours blur together to produce one continuous form. Instead of German pretentiousness, logic, reason, tension, climax, and the deep personal longings of the soul, instead of all that, it's like looking into a stream of sensation and consciousness. In 1870, a war broke out between the Germanic nations and France, the Franco-Prussian War. France wanted to restore its dominant position in Europe, but they were beaten down by the Prussians. In a German victory, the German states decided to become one nation state, the German Empire. France was arguably left weakened and humiliated, while Germany was left stronger than before. It was time for music to step up to the game, and instead of fighting Germany on its own ground by its own rules, one composer would create a ripple that would change music history forever. That man was Erik Satie? This guy? The guy who dropped out of school, whose piano teacher called him the laziest student in the conservatoire, who applied repeatedly to France's Academy of Fine Arts just to troll them? Well, yeah, this guy. In 1887, Satie wrote this saraband. Just listen to the beginning. It might not sound like much by today's standards, but this is game-changing. Every single one of these chords is a seventh chord or even a ninth chord. In German music, chords with sevenths are considered dissonances, longing to be resolved, normally through a perfect cadence. But here, the sevenths no longer sound like dissonances. They just are. Satie turns seventh and ninth chords into consonances, chords that sound nice without needing to be resolved. Moreover, there's no sense of a cadence anywhere, and there's no sense of wanting a cadence either. The Germans were over there trying to explore the innermost longings of the soul, and Satie thought, screw that, I just want something that's elegant and beautiful. There's no sense of humanity, there's no sorrow, pain, joy, none of that, just something beautiful. Instead of tension, there's simply calm. A more famous piece by Satie is his first Gymnopédie. It starts with this pendulum swing between two major seventh chords, a G major seventh and a D major seventh. But neither of these chords are treated as dissonances, waiting to be resolved. They are just there for their beauty. And when the melody comes in, it too focuses first on the seventh and ninth degrees of the scale. It was around this time that Satie and Debussy met and became friends, and Debussy's music was highly influenced by these Satie piano pieces. A big difference between these two men is that where Satie dropped out of conservatoire, Debussy graduated with distinction and won numerous prizes along the way. Debussy was a highly skilled and highly accomplished musician, and yet he decided that his music would follow these same principles. What were dissonances by German standards would become consonances. Traditional cadences were no longer necessary, and the aim, above all, was not to pour into the innermost depths of the human soul, but to create music of elegant or exquisite beauty. So here's how Debussy's music sounds French, or more specifically, here's how Debussy's music sounds the way a Monet painting looks. Some prime music to understand Debussy's style is his Préludes for piano. Debussy wrote 2 books of piano preludes. The first was written in only 3 months between 1909 and 1910. The first thing we notice about the Préludes is their titles. These titles don't focus on human emotion or human situations, but rather on impressionistic ideas. They could just as well be titles to Impressionist paintings. The sounds and the perfumes swirl through the evening air, footsteps in the snow, the submerged cathedral. But what makes these titles even more interesting is where he places them in the music. Not at the beginning, but at the end, after the music is finished. Often in brackets and preceded by an ellipsis, as if these titles were only a suggestion, a subtle whisper, an impression rather than a fixed idea. Already, Debussy is avoiding fixed forms. But let's look closer at the music. First, footsteps in the snow. It starts with the direction sad and slow, followed by these bare, almost haunting notes. But Debussy focuses on the subtleties of sound color too. With the direction, this rhythm must have the sonic character of a sad and frozen landscape. It's as if painterly ideas are being fused into the music. The melody over the top is in a mixture of modes, unwilling to commit to any specific key. But what happens next is extraordinary. Debussy harmonizes the music with a series of parallel chords sinking into the depths. Each chord moves in total parallel motion, completely breaking all the Germanic rules of voice leading. But more than that, the chords together make 9th, 11th, even 13th chords. These chords aren't treated as dissonances waiting to be resolved. They're treated as consonances, sounding lovely just the way they are. There's no sense of Germanic tension and resolution. Instead, we enjoy the beauty of these chords as they come. Take another prelude, Voiles. Even the title of this prelude is blurry and ambiguous. Depending on the gender of the word, it could mean sails or it could mean veils. He marks the tempo in a rhythm without rigor and caressed. And instead of using a standard major or minor scale, Debussy chooses the whole tone scale. This is a scale made up of only whole tones or whole steps. And because of that, it means there's not a single semitone in sight, no more leading tones. Perfect cadences become impossible, and so no more Germanic tension and resolution. In this scale, no note is more important than any other. They are all of equal value. Harmonies blur together, and so the music just exists in this kind of glassy, beautiful texture. Or take another prelude, the submerged cathedral. The first direction we are given is profoundly calm in a softly sonorous mist. What an extraordinary, painterly direction for a musician. The music begins with absolute parallelism, a complete sin against German music. But what's perhaps more interesting is the sound colours that Debussy creates with just a piano. These chords submerging from the deep like a great mass underwater. It's unclear what key we're in, if we're in a key at all. And so these harmonies, which, because they seem to lack any tonal relationship sound as if they are blurred together like an Impressionist painting. Perhaps this is the sound of a great cathedral organ from beneath the glassy water. And then later, perhaps these are the cathedral bells, distant, sad, wistful. This piece paints an extraordinary and powerful image, and Debussy writes as if he were a painter, blurring together sound colours and harmonies to create something that is not set in stone, but an impression of exquisite beauty. Finally, there's his seminal orchestral piece, his Prélude to the Afternoon of a Faune. It begins with a chromatic scale, and with no sense of what key we might be in. Are we in C sharp? G? Maybe E. It's completely blurred. But even then, the sound colour he uses is carefully chosen. This C sharp can be notoriously hollow sounding on the flute, and Debussy leaves the flute completely exposed here. It's an odd sound colour, but like an Impressionist painter, Debussy uses it delicately and intentionally. Then there's this sweep of colour, the harp and winds in one bar, and then muted strings in the next bar, seamlessly switching between these different colour palettes. We next hear the theme harmonised as a D major 7th chord. This major 7th is not a dissonance, it just is. It's just a chord beautiful for its own sake. And the orchestra is written with such delicacy, the strings marked sur la touche, meaning play it on the fingerboard for an extra soft effect. I think it's no stretch to compare Debussy's orchestral writing to the delicacy of colour in a Monet painting. We hear the same theme again, now as the 13th note above an E major chord. Again, this isn't dissonance, but a beautiful new consonance. And there's so much more to say about this work that I might have to break it down in a separate video, but I think it's clear how France defined itself and escaped the shadow of Germany. Following in the style of their Impressionist painters, these composers began to focus on elegance and beauty rather than human passions and tensions. Chords that once needed resolving now became beautiful for their own sake, and the harmonies and sound colours became blurred together expertly, producing an effect that wasn't focused on solid forms, but on the subtlety of impressions to create these sensations of exquisite beauty. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more like this. And if you want to help support this channel or buy me a coffee to say thank you, you can do so on Patreon. There's a link in the description. Thank you for watching.